Hello, welcome to Life from Above. My name is David Kenney. Today we have a special guest. We have Kevin Maul. He is soon to be a graduate of the West Virginia School of Preaching. Kevin, glad you could be with us on the show.
It's good to be here.
It has down that you're from the Lubbock congregation in Parkersburg, West Virginia.
Yes, sir.
And you graduated from the Parkersburg South High School.
Yes, graduated 2011.
Now, was that where you were born? Or?
Yeah, I've lived in Parkersburg my whole life up until now.
Okay, well, great. Also has down that you have an interest in music, symphonic band, marching band.
All of it. I was in marching band all of high school, and then I was also in symphonic, and I made it into all-state band my senior year. So I played tuba a lot, and I loved it.
So you had a lot of music theory with that, obviously.
Yeah.
And so I imagine, was it an easy transition to go from the tuba to be able to do things like lead and singing? That's something you do, and how's that transition for you?
Other than the nervousness at first, it wasn't too bad.
Well, good. Well, we definitely need song leaders and preachers too. I've had to do, if you ever get to a small congregation, sometimes you're wearing multiple hats, and sometimes that happens. Andy Robinson wrote a little bit about you in the Publishing Peace issue. I'll read an excerpt from it. It says, Kevin has proven self-discipline in both bodily exercise and exercising himself toward godliness, 1 Timothy 4:8. When not studying and preaching, he likes to hike, ride, bicycle, exercise, and give attention to personal physical fitness. It's not every day that you have someone that is a student, which is a sedentary kind of position. You're sitting a lot. And so if you're sitting all day, I imagine the exercise has got to be a major benefit to you. Why don't you tell them the dynamic? Because there's all kinds of things you could do. And you chose to do some hiking and biking and things like that. What kind of impact does that have for you to be able to study and things like that?
Well, honestly, it helps the brain flow a lot. One thing people don't realize is when you sit around all the time, you sort of, as you said, adopt this sedentary lifestyle. And as you sit, things sort of slow down. You sort of get sluggish. Life kind of goes by at a slow turtle pace. But if you add a little bit of a change into it, get up, get active, you get blood flow going through the brain. And it actually, personally, in my own experience, has helped me to study a lot better, because a lot of people might have some pent-up energy, especially when you're sitting down for a long time. I've had ADD my whole life, and one way to spend off some of that excess energy is to just run around, get active, and sort of burn myself out physically a little bit so I could just sit down and calmly study. And personally, it's helped me a lot more to study in that way, instead of just getting out of class, trying to study some more, and having my mind wander 1,000 different places.
So you've had a lot of challenges that some people may not have to be able to sit. Because some people can sit for hours in front of a TV, or they can sit for hours and listen to a lecture maybe. But when you have something like a condition you have, that's an extra challenge. And so that's very good. So really that benefit's going to help you quite a bit, because I remember reading one of the ways to combat physiological, not situational, but physical depression is walking. Because walking really, it tells your body that you're accomplishing something, and that's a healthy feel for your body, and it helps you mentally. So that's very good. Let me ask you a little bit about your family. You have any family in the church? What's that situation like with you?
Well, on my mom's side, not really, but on my dad's side, my grandpa is an elder, and then my father attends church, and so do my brother and sister. And my grandfather is an elder, but that's about it. Other than that, I have no preachers in my family or anything in that regard.
Well, it starts somewhere with someone, so that's great. Now, when were you baptized?
I was baptized when I was about 13 years old.
Who did that?
Someone at camp. I think it was Jason Thompson.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, I believe it was Jason Thompson.
Now, which camp?
Well, Ohio Valley Christian Youth Camp.
Ohio Valley Christian Youth Camp. Okay. Tell us a little bit about your classes. Some of your favorite classes at the school. What you liked about them.
Well, one thing about classes is it's definitely an eye-opening experience. It's a lot more work than any person would normally anticipate going to school of preaching. And it's a lot more work for a very valuable reason, of course. And it's been a lot of studying, a lot of homework, it seems, trying to study to write a paper while you're also worried about a test the next day and homework assignments and all that stuff, but somehow it all gets done at the end of the day. I honestly don't know how, even to this point. But I've loved classes. I've loved learning, sort of soaked it all up as a sponge. I didn't really know as much as I should have about the Bible before I came here. And to talk about some of my favorite classes, it's really a toss-up. I loved the second year classes so far, but I had a few classes in my first year that really just shined above the others, and I believe one of them was probably 1 Corinthians, taught by Edmund Watt. It's a very good class, talking about church discussion, talking about handling church problems, because they were having a lot of problems, they were having a lot of divisions. And then another class I really liked, just the way it was taught and how it was taught on the Friday afternoon, was the marriage and family class. It was a nice way to end the week. It wasn't too stressful. It was a nice class to learn about marriage problems. Well, not marriage problems, but learn about different aspects or different ideals of what people think marriage should be, than learning about the Christian ideal and the ideal that God expects marriage to be, and learning how to sort of present that case. And it was also a little bit of fun strung in there, and just good learning in that regard. And so I really don't know if I could put a finger on which class is my favorite, but there's been a lot of good ones.
Well, great. I know Ed Malott's a very good teacher. Let me ask you this question. You mentioned, your family's just, you have siblings that are members of the church. And all. How did you get to the point that, you're interested in the symphonic band, you went to high school and all that. How did you get to the point that you decided you wanted to preach?
Well, honestly, I did a lot of things, good things in high school, but after high school I sort of fell into a rut. I wasn't the best. I worked a dead-end job. Life wasn't the greatest, and there was a certain guy, and I'm not going to say who he is, but he really shone as an example of Christ. Something I'd never really seen from people before, because I was sort of an outcast, sort of avoided, but the guy kind of took me under his wings, and he was a preacher, and I don't know, it's one of those things where you really can never pay the person back for what he did, but after learning all these things, sort of pay it forward. And I wasn't going to do it till another guy said, "Kevin, you never shut up, and you know about the Bible. Become a preacher." And I said, "All right, I'll try it out." And so far, I've absolutely loved it. It's been a great opportunity, and I'm glad I chose to do it. I feel like it's the right decision for my life.
Now, I have down here that you say you plan to go to get some more education, possibly become a licensed professional counselor.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like you have an interest in what field. Why is that something you're thinking about doing?
I have an interest in psychology because, as I said, I didn't have the best life. One thing that happened is I had therapy growing up, and I realized that the person who gave me counseling was a Christian counselor. And so he didn't give me some hodgepodge explanation, and he didn't try to give me a worldly explanation. Instead, he tried to help me cope with things from a Christian aspect, and he did an excellent job. And I honestly don't know if I'd be the same person without that guidance. And another one of those things, you sort of want to pass it forward. And especially growing up, I was sort of the mellow guy. Of course, I'm a little rambunctious in a crowd, but when I get alone with other people, I'm really mellow and willing to let people just vent and listen. And it would be nice to become experienced at it. It would be nice to be able to have a degree to where I could not have to worry so much about the church being sued or worry about a lot of other problems that are becoming more prevalent, and just have a lot more experience counseling, because as preachers, a lot of people are going to come to us for advice, and it would be nice to be more well-equipped for it.
Well, I know that I regularly have people that will ask me about counseling, and they're looking, and I'll talk to them a little bit to find, it doesn't take very long to figure out, when they're asking you, a lot of times they're really asking you to refer to somebody who really knows. And so that is a very important work, to be able to have somebody that you can refer a person to. That's, sometimes that's the biggest help you can give them, is put them in contact with the right people. So that's very good. How about, you're talking about gospel preaching, evangelism, that kind of work. How do you figure that is going to play into your efforts to
hopefully successfully? All joking aside, I do hope to get door knocking campaigns, to get reach out campaigns going on. I'd love to be able to spread the word to as many people as possible. And probably one of my first goals when I get settled into a place is to go around, try to present the word to as many doors, knock on as many doors as I can, and try to get as many people to come into the church. It's not about the numbers in the church, obviously, but I want a lot of people to come to Christ and be saved. And one way to do that is reaching out and just trying to get the community together as a whole.
Every person's a number, right?
That's right.
Or every number's a person.
Every number is a person.
That's right. That's right. I mean, either way, it's still true.
Yeah, it's still true. But every
true.
number is a person. Every number is a soul.
That's right.
That needs to come to Christ.
Very good. What's your favorite book of the Bible? It's one of the questions you gave me that you thought you'd like to take a stab at.
Yeah, I would like to take a stab at. Well, I mentioned in my sermon earlier that First John was, and it is one of my favorite because you get that confirmation. You get that we know this. It's not about, well, we might go to heaven. It says that God promised this and he cannot lie. And it said all these other things. We know these things. But also, honestly, I'm more of a practical person. I'm more of a person who likes practical ideals, likes things that way. Very rational. I have to say, probably my favorite book is James. It's very practical. It's sort of the Proverbs of the New Testament. You follow it. You can teach it so many different ways. You can use so many different points. And if you read James and understand it properly, of course, Martin Luther called it the Epistle of Straw, but that's because it disagreed with some things he thought. But if you follow the book of James properly, you can practically know how to live as a Christian. And it's definitely one that every Christian should read. And the thing I love the most about it is it's so simple, too, that you can hand it to a new Christian, say, read this book and tell me what you think about it, instead of trying to get them to read something as complicated as Ephesians or Galatians and trying to do an in-depth study, or even Revelation. You can just say, hey, read the book of James and tell me what you think about it. I've probably read that book over 20 times, and I still learn something from it every time I read it.
I had Winfred Claiborne for that class, and actually had him for what they call the Catholic epistles, or general epistles is what they called it. And we had to memorize 75 memory verses. So I actually memorized the first 75 verses of James. So don't ask me to quote it now. But
as long as you don't ask me.
Now, you mentioned to me you have ADD.
Yeah.
Did you have that? What that presents some unique challenges as far as preaching. I don't know about. Do you get nervous? Is that something you have to battle with? What kind of things a person out there, maybe a young person, maybe they want to preach, maybe they have ADD, and maybe they're afraid to do it. And you're somebody that's getting ready to graduate. What would you say to somebody that maybe they have ADD and they're thinking about becoming a preacher and they just don't know? What kind of challenges have you faced that relates to that, preaching, and whether or not that was a good decision for you to come to the school?
First off, I'd say there's hope for everyone. Nice thing about ADD is the more you grow up, the more it's tolerable. Fortunately, mine was never bad enough that I really needed a lot of medicine. I needed medicine in high school for it, obviously, but I've sort of weaned myself off of it. The best advice I could give is, honestly, one thing I do is I pace around a lot. And so I'll sort of have the table, I'll have notes kind of spun around in the circle, and I'll pace around while reading them, or I'll do something in that regard. And the thing I always do before each sermon is sort of a power pause, as I read from Speak Like Lincoln, Stand Like Churchill. But one thing I do first is I stare at my shoes and say, these are the shoes of a preacher, this is my job. It's a weird thing, I know, but it sets my mind on that task. And then the next thing I do is I stand up there and I just pause for a second. Whether I need to fix my tie, whether I need to hold my book, I just pause for a second and let it all come in. I don't try to just jump into a sermon like you're jumping off a ship or something. Normally, if you're going to jump out of a plane, you scan everything around first before you jump out and get into the action. And that's the one thing I like to do, not give the, hey, how you guys doing, or give the big greet like that. I just pause for a moment, I soak it all in, I get a stern focus, and I set it as my goal, because one thing to do maybe is, a lot of people like to have a lot of verses or something. And one thing with people with ADD, why they can sit and watch or sit and play a video game for a long time, is because the screen's always moving, it's always refreshing. But really looking around, but not too much to get distracted, because it's easy to get distracted, but focusing on people's eyes or focusing on something in that regard, because a crying baby one time almost ruined my sermon. I remember one time I was in the preaching, it was my first year, and a phone went off, and I just about lost my whole sermon. I got distracted by the phone, forgot where I was. It was terrifying, it was horrible, but you'll survive. And it will happen. It'll even happen to people without ADD. Something will distract them. It's just more prone to being distracted. Just don't let those things get to you. Stay focused, stay stern, set your eyes on the prize, and keep good notes. Don't try to, at least for myself, I try not to preach without notes. People say it's possible, and I believe it, but it's one loud boom or one big distraction. Maybe the mic acts up and does a loud boom. It happens sometimes to Hillview. I'd be lost. I wouldn't know what to do. Keep notes. And I scribble on my notes sometimes after I finish it too. Like I'll say, all right, take a deep breath here, calm down. Don't go too fast. One thing I used to do all the time is I'd say the word C. Now, C, you do this, and C, we do that. And someone said, you're being a little patronizing. And I said, what? Patronizing? He said, yeah, you say C all the time. So I just wrote it down at the top. Don't say C. Put an exclamation point by it. And I'd look at the top of it, just focus on my paper. I'd see in big, bold letters and pen, don't say C. And that worked a lot, too. And just leave little friendly reminders for yourself on your paper. It seems kind of schizophrenic. It seems kind of crazy, but I do it about every sermon. There's little friendly reminders all over it. And it's just something that helps, and just stay focused. I know it's hard to do, but you can stay focused. It can work. It's just, you gotta maybe have fire or something, and preach on interesting stuff. Because there's some preachers who, no offense, can be kind of bland. Don't be bland. You'll bore yourself to death. So that's some advice for that, I guess.
Now you made a statement, and I've never heard it before. It was, speak like Lincoln. And stand like Churchill.
That's a book that was written. It's a good book to read.
Is it about public speaking? Or
yes,
is it
about public speaking. And
I've never heard of that before.
If you haven't heard of it, you need to. It's a great book to read.
Well, great. Tell them what your plans are for, graduation's coming up June 15th.
That's right.
And what are you going to be doing then?
I'm going to be doing a year internship at the Washington Street Church of Christ over in Fairview, West Virginia. For everyone that asks, it's about 30 minutes from Fairmont, so it's about in the middle of nowhere. The closest Walmart's about 30 minutes, but that's no big deal. And I'll be helping out with the tasks there, the associate minister, helping Peter Ray Cole. I'll be preaching there as well as doing some evangelism stuff and just helping with the youth and doing whatever people need me to for a year. And somewhere around that time, I'll be trying to find a permanent work, or I'll be trying to go back to school, or maybe I'll find a permanent work and do online classes, but either way, I'd like to further my education in some way or possible while presenting the Word of God.
Well, let me ask you a question here. Sometimes we'll have some people say, well, if you go to a preaching school, then you got to be ready to preach. And some people say, well, I want to further my education. Nothing wrong with furthering anyone's education. I mean, people that say, you don't need to further your education, I'm like, well, that's sort of not a very educational statement. But anyway. But let me ask you, the training you received at West Virginia School of Preaching, was it challenging?
Yes.
Do you feel that it prepared you to be able to do the work of evangelist?
Yes.
So no doubt about that. So you're looking to supplement in other areas
especially because further up north you get, or further you get in deserted places, there's a lot of churches that really need a preacher but can't afford it. So if I had and I'm not saying all preachers should have a secular job, because there's a lot of time put into studying and there's a lot of time put into preparing sermons, as well as visiting, as well as praying, as well as doing other things. Preaching is a full-time job in and of itself, but sometimes there's just churches that can't quite afford that, and I'd like to be able to help out. I'm still young. I can still do a lot of things. So knock on wood, hopefully I'll be able to further my education in counseling, or further in something that would help me to be able to preach and it not hinder the church as much.
Who have been some of the people that have encouraged you along the way? Because 2 years in school doesn't sound like a long time, but I know it's a very intensive program. It's very demanding, and it takes a lot of time and commitment to do it. And you need people behind you to help you, to sort of cheer you on. Who's been people that have encouraged you through this?
I don't even think I could say a list long enough. There's been so many people. It's great to feel that encouragement. It's great to feel that push. The number two people, I have to say two, there's no number one rank. Two people have that, are my grandparents. My grandma, my grandpa. They are constantly pushing me. And in a good way. It's not a negative way they're pushing me, but they're constantly saying, all right, you got this. If I'm just kind of bummed out or burned out, it's like, nah, just hang in there. You got this. And then my grandma, happened the first year, and probably once the second year, I'd be kind of bogged down, and all of a sudden I'd notice a card in my mailbox, and it's from my grandma, and it would say something really heartwarming. You got this. I'm so proud of you. I can't believe you're being a preacher. That's amazing. Hang in there. You got this. And it would just lift me up 1,000 times. It would really lift up my spirits. It would reinvigorate me and say, I got this. Also, my parents, my siblings, everyone at the Lubeck Church that is handling my finances, everyone at Lubeck supports me, and whenever I come back to visit every once in a while, they're all, hey, Kevin, how have you been? How's preaching? How's this other stuff? Yeah, I finally got to preach there once, and either they were lying or being friendly, but they said I wasn't awful, so that was something. So it was a pretty good experience there, and honestly, people at the school, just about everywhere I go, there's people encouraging me. It's been fantastic.
People are kind.
Yes.
They're very kind.
Yes.
Let me ask you, you went into preaching school, school of preaching. Went in there, you had, you have your life, you have your expectations, you go into it, and maybe some things that you learned, or some things, what kind of things surprised you, but maybe you didn't anticipate, that now you go, oh, now, I didn't really realize that when I started, but now I could see that more clearly.
That is a good question. First thing I realized is, not to sound controversial, but not everyone sees eye to eye about everything. And one thing that really shocked me that now made sense is, especially not before going here, what I thought being a Christian meant was just go to church, don't be a horrible person, you'll be all right. And then I realized there's a lot more to it. And I said, well, after reading all these books, it makes a lot more sense too. It was just stuff like that. One thing that really surprised me is the fact that I had 6 papers to do the first quarter, and they were all 8 pages. That really surprised me. I thought, wow, that's a lot of papers. But now I look back at it, it's like, well, you got to do a lot of studying. You got to show you learned something somehow. But anything really big doctrinal, I don't think I was really surprised about anything. Maybe surprised about a few people's ideologies about the Godhead, and surprised about a few things like that. But a lot of it did make sense afterwards.
Okay. What are some of the books that you have found? I mean, obviously the Bible, that goes with saying. But what are some other books, people that have written, things they've written that you found very beneficial in your studies?
Reese's commentaries. Everything done by Reese. He's a master of the Greek language. And whenever I write a Bible lesson or whenever I do an in-depth study, his book's one of the first books I go to. Hermeneutics by Duncan is also a very good book. And I love the Truth for Today commentaries. I love to read. Truth for Today commentaries normally never disappoints. Reese never disappoints. I sometimes read Bert Kaufman stuff, but sometimes it's a little iffy. But honestly, I've done a lot of reading. Wow, okay. But honestly, one thing I normally always turn to is a Truth for Today commentary and Reese's commentary. I like to read some stuff from other people's point of views, but it's hard to find that at the school of preaching because they have a very, I don't want to say conservative, but they have a set library, and normally when you got to find out of the box or weird theories, like I did a paper on Ezekiel about the cherubim, and there was a theory that they were aliens. I had to go outside of that library, and I found a couple books there, like Chariots of the Gods, Mysteries of the Bibles, by a couple of atheists. Well, I don't think Mystery of the Bibles was by atheists, but it was by people who weren't sound Christians, to learn their ideology and learn what they thought and how they thought in that regard. But normally I turn to more conservative books when I do my studies, such as Truth for Today, and Reese is a big one. And normally if it's just something I find that I really like, I might add a quote from it. One book I read, or I started to read, was something called How to Lose a Kingdom in 400 Years, and it's a very interesting book too.
Michael Whitworth.
Yeah, Michael Whitworth. But it's more of a book to learn on your own than it is a reference book or an educational book in that regard.
What are some of the themes that you like to preach on?
What are some of the themes I like to preach on? Sin. Okay, no.
Well, that is a biblical topic.
Yeah, it is a biblical topic. I'm guilty of this, but it's something I'll get more into as I finish studying, because I don't want to be taken the wrong way. So I haven't really preached on any specific sins, if that makes sense. I haven't preached specifically on homosexuality. I haven't preached specifically on lying or something like that, where you'd really have to dig deep down into, and I really want to. But for most of the stuff, it's more of, I seem to have 2 characteristics. First one is kind of, people wouldn't believe it, but I kind of, hellfire and brimstone, I feel myself, is something that is more like, I don't condemn people from the pulpit, but I talk about, listen, if you're doing the sin and you're walking in it, you're not going to be right. And then the other one I talk about is more of an encouragement thing, like I preach from the Psalms, preach from other things, trying to encourage people. And that's more in that regard. So
great. Well, Kevin, it's great to have you in the studio. Thanks for coming in, and we wish you all the best in your studies and in your work.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for watching our program. Before we close our program today, we'd like to take a moment and review this roadmap to heaven with you, since the matter is so serious. There are many incorrect set of directions out there, and sadly, so many people are following them. For example, some people have been given wrong turns. They believe things such as faith only, works only, or grace only. Or some attempt to change the order of the turns, being baptized before they even believe. Some people fail to realize what point they are on the map. Don't even open their Bibles yet, and they think they're saved already. As a person travels in a car or takes a hike, it has to follow the proper directions, so we must follow the proper directions to heaven. Let's take a look at the directions on our roadmap to heaven here. You have to look at these passages in your Bible for yourself. We'll just list the steps, the turns on the way. First is to believe or to have faith. And then number 2, to repent, to turn away from sin. Number 3 is to confess that Jesus is the Son of God. Number 4 is immersion, or to be baptized, which is a burial in water to have your sins washed away. And then you're added to the church by the Lord, not by a group of people, or not by giving some kind of testimonial experience or things like that. And then once you're added, you need to serve and worship the Lord faithfully all the days of your life. And the key word's faithfully. You don't waver. And that's very important. We need to keep in mind, too, that in Noah's day there was a big flood, and only people in the ark were saved from the flood. The same is true today. There is no salvation outside the Lord's church. Where are you on the roadmap to heaven? Thanks for watching our program. Please let us know if we can assist you with further information for your journey.